August 1943. The Campinos Forest, 30 kilometers northwest of Warsaw. Lieutenant Lech Gryf Nowak of the Armia Krajowa, Home Army, lay motionless, the damp earth of the forest floor chilling him through his worn greatcoat. He smelled pine, diesel fumes, and his own stale sweat. Below him, on the narrow dirt track that served as a critical German supply route, the convoy approached. The heavy, rhythmic clatter of Opel Blitz trucks, their engines groaning in low gear, was a sound he had come to despise. His orders were simple: observe. His unit, the Jodwa platoon, was too low on explosives to risk an assault. He gripped the stock of his captured Mauser, his knuckles white. He was waiting for the inevitable. The trucks would pass, carrying bullets and shells to kill more Poles, more Russians, and the war would grind on. He watched the lead truck, its canvas cover dark with rain, rumble past his position. Then the second. He tensed, expecting a mine. But there was no mine. Instead, he heard a faint thwack from the opposite side of the road, like a heavy branch snapping. He saw a tiny dark object arc through the twilight. It was almost invisible. The object struck the canvas roof of the third truck. For a second, nothing. Then, a bloom of intense, white-hot fire erupted, silent and vicious. Before the driver could react, another thwack. A second spark, this one hitting the gap near the fuel tank of the truck behind it. A whoosh of igniting diesel vapor split the air. In less than 10 seconds, 2 trucks were ablaze. The convoy slammed to a halt. Shouts in German. Panic. A machine gun opened up, firing blindly into the trees. Lech stared, his mind unable to process what he had seen. There was no explosion, no anti-tank rifle crack. Only silence, then fire. The established belief was that stopping a convoy required 10 kilograms of TNT or a suicidal close-range ambush. That belief had just been shattered. The intruder wasn't a new cannon or a magnetic mine. It was a 15-year-old orphan named Jan, perched in a pine tree 40 meters away, armed with a reinforced slingshot. This was the first field test of the Schersen, the Hornet, a weapon born from desperation, scarcity, and the precise mind of a boy who had lost everything. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the hidden stories of wartime innovation, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. 2 months earlier, the mood in the Jodwa platoon's forest encampment had been grim. Lech reviewed an after-action report, the kerosene lamp in his dugout casting long, dancing shadows. The report detailed their latest failure. A pressure plate teller mine, which took 2 men 6 hours to plant, had been placed on the same road. It had detonated under the last truck in a convoy, merely damaging its axle. The German escort had pinned down the retrieval team, killing 2 partisans, Wilk and Borsuk, before they could get back to the tree line. The cost-benefit analysis was catastrophic. They had traded 2 experienced soldiers for 1 damaged truck. Morale was crumbling. The men felt less like soldiers and more like fugitives, slowly being starved and hunted. In this atmosphere of cold desperation, the mundane became conspicuous. Lech stepped out of the dugout, frustrated, and noticed Jan. The boy was the camp's runner, an orphan brought in from the ruins of Otwock. He was small for 15, quiet, and perpetually tinkering. Most of the men ignored him. But Jan wasn't playing. He was training. He stood near the edge of the camp, a heavy custom-made slingshot in his hand. He wasn't shooting pebbles. He was firing heavy, lead-weighted darts, stabilized with small canvas fins. He placed a rusted tin can on a branch 40 meters away. He drew the sling, his slight body tensing. The heavy rubber bands, salvaged from a German motorcycle's inner tube, were drawn back to his ear. A sharp thwack. The dart hissed through the air and punched a clean hole through the can. One of the partisans, a cynical veteran named Kret, chuckled. "Look, David prepares to fight Goliath." John ignored him, retrieved his dart, and meticulously inspected its fins. He paced off another 10 meters, making the shot impossibly far. Lek watched. It wasn't the shot that caught his attention, it was the consistency. Jan's motions were economical, practiced, almost mechanical. This was not a game. This was the behavior of a craftsman, or a sniper. Jan was practicing a form of ballistics. While the partisans were focused on explosive force, Jan was obsessed with precision delivery. That evening, Jan approached Lek, holding not a weapon, but one of his heavy darts. His voice was barely a whisper. "Poruchniku, Lieutenant. They guard the trucks, but they don't guard the canvas." Lek, tired and dismissive, started to wave him off. "Go to sleep, Maui, little one." But Jan persisted, his eyes intense. "Kret's bombs are too heavy. He has to get too close. But the truck's canvas. It is waterproofed with wax. The fuel caps have rubber seals." He held up the dart. "I can hit the can every time. 40 meters. 50. It's silent. What if this—" he tapped the weighted lead head. "Wasn't lead? What if it was fire?" Lek stopped. He looked at the boy, then at the dart. A flicker of an idea, absurd and desperate, began to form. He saw the looks the other men gave the boy: pity, annoyance. But Lek, facing the reality of his dwindling resources and mounting losses, saw something else. He saw a potential delivery system. A silent mortar that could deliver a payload no heavier than a matchbox. What he didn't know was that this seemingly absurd idea would soon force the German High Command to reroute an entire supply corridor. The strategic problem facing the Polish Home Army in 1943 was one of profound asymmetry. The German occupation had transformed Poland into the logistical backbone of the Eastern Front. Every day, thousands of tons of materiel, ammunition, fuel, spare parts, and rations traveled from factories in the Reich across Poland to feed the Wehrmacht's titanic struggle against the Soviet Union. The General Gouvernement was not just an occupied territory, it was a massive military staging ground. The primary arteries were the railways, which the AK's sapper units, like Kedu, targeted with impressive and heroic success. But interdicting railways was a high-risk, high-resource operation, one that brought swift and terrible reprisals. The secondary arteries were the Rollbahnen, the main roads. Convoys of Opel Blitz 3, 6-ton trucks, Mercedes-Benz L3000s, and captured French Renaults moved day and night. German logistical doctrine was ruthlessly efficient. These convoys were not isolated. They were protected by Sicherungsregimenter, security regiments, often equipped with armored cars like the Sadi KFZ 222 and machine guns. A field report from the AK's Radom Kielce district, dated May 1943, was bleak. Attempted ambush on E7 route convoy. Partisan force armed with rifles, 3 Sten guns, and hand grenades. German escort, 2 vehicles, returned overwhelming fire. Partisan losses, 4 KIA, 6 WIA. German losses, unknown. Convoy proceeded. This was the cold, hard math of the Forest War. The partisans simply lacked the heavy weapons to counter even a light escort. The standard-issue Tellermine 42 anti-tank mine weighed over 9 kilograms. It was heavy to transport, dangerous to plant, and difficult to conceal. Worse, it was a single-use weapon. A successful detonation might destroy one truck, but the convoy would continue, and the sapper team would be lucky to escape. The AK High Command, prioritizing railway sabotage, could spare few of these precious devices for low-yield road interdiction. The partisans needed a method that was low-cost, lightweight, repeatable, and above all, silent. They needed a weapon that allowed the attacker to engage and withdraw before the enemy could even pinpoint their location. They weren't trying to win a battle. They were trying to bleed the German supply chain, one truck at a time. The statistical reality of the supply war translated directly into human suffering. For every failed ambush, the German response was predictable and brutal. The policy of Bandenbekämpfung, bandit fighting, gave German security forces free rein to enact collective punishment. A field report from a German Feldgendarmerie unit operating near Zamość read, "Following partisan activity, the villages of A and B were pacified. 120 males were detained for labor processing. 45 suspected bandit helpers were shot. Every bullet the partisans fired, every mine they laid, was a gamble with the lives of the civilians they were trying to protect." This reality weighed heavily on Lech and his men. The hunger, the damp cold of the forest, the constant fear of betrayal, all this was compounded by the psychological burden of their own impotence. The partisans were trapped in a cycle of futility. To stop the German war machine, they had to stop its supplies. But to stop the supplies, they needed weapons they didn't have. And every attempt they did make, every costly failure, brought more death and misery to the very people they had sworn to defend. The men were exhausted, not just physically but spiritually. They were losing hope. The scale of the German industrial and military machine seemed insurmountable. It was an avalanche of steel, and they were trying to stop it with handfuls of gravel. The consensus, from the hardened veterans in the field to the strategists in London, was that stopping defended truck convoys without anti-tank artillery or a massive numerical advantage was impossible. Experts agreed. It couldn't be done. Jan Kowalski was not a soldier. He was a survivor. Born in Warsaw in 1928, he was the son of a university clockmaker. His childhood was not one of fields and forests, but of gears, springs, and precise, delicate tools. His father had taught him to see the world as a series of interconnected mechanisms. "Everything, Jan," his father would say, "even a stone has a principle. You just have to find it." When the 1939 siege of Warsaw began, their world of mechanisms was obliterated by the crude mechanics of artillery. Jan, then 11, watched his apartment building collapse. He was pulled from the rubble, but his parents were not. He became one of the Warsaw Robins, the thousands of orphans who learned to survive in the city's ruins. For 3 years, he lived by his wits. He scavenged, he stole, and he observed. He watched German patrols, noting their routes. He learned the physics of ruins, which walls would hold, which would fall. And he perfected his only tool, a heavy-duty slingshot, one of the last gifts from his father. But where other boys used slingshots to hunt rats with pebbles, Jan used his to solve problems. He used it to knock fruit from guarded trees, to break windows for diversions, to silently signal other scavengers. He didn't just fire it, he calibrated it. He learned to braid new bands from salvaged rubber. He scavenged ball bearings, which had a predictable weight and trajectory, unlike stones. His mind, shaped by his father's precision and the brutal scarcity of the ruins, was a unique instrument. He saw the war not as a clash of ideologies, but as a massive, inefficient machine. In early 1943, an AK patrol sweeping the forests near Otwock found him scavenging at a German supply dump. Impressed by his silence and nerve, they took him in. In the partisan camp, he was an anomaly. He was useless with a rifle, too small for heavy labor. He was assigned to be a runner and camp helper. He cleaned weapons, carried messages, and watched the real soldiers. He saw them struggle with their heavy, crude, and loud weapons. He saw the waste. He saw the frustration. And in the failure of their minds and the futility of their ambushes, his precise clockmaker's mind saw a flaw in the mechanism. They were attacking the strength of the truck, its steel frame. They should have been attacking its weakness, its fuel, its tires, its flammable canvas. The moment of insight occurred in the camp's makeshift armory, a damp hole dug under the roots of an ancient oak. Jan was cleaning rifles, observing Kret, the platoon's sapper. Kret was a brave man, but a blunt instrument. He was trying to assemble a sticky bomb, a sock filled with gun cotton and coated in axle grease. "To make this work," Kret complained to Lek, "I have to run right up to the Panzer and slap it on. It's suicide." Jan watched, his mind working. The problem wasn't the explosive, it was the delivery. He looked at the sapper's materials laid out on a cloth: gun cotton, fuses, and a box of small pencil-like chemical initiators. They were Type H time delay fuses, a glass vial of sulfuric acid designed to break and eat through a wire, triggering a detonator. Jan's mind made the connection. Acid. He had seen what leaking battery acid did to cloth. Later, he experimented. He soaked a rag in gasoline and tried to shoot it with a flaming piece of cotton. It failed. The flame extinguished in flight. He needed something that didn't carry fire. He needed something that created it on impact. He approached Kret, holding one of the small chemical fuses. "Kret, what if you didn't need the whole bomb? What if you just needed the fire?" Kret, annoyed, brushed him off. "Fire? What are you talking about, boy? Go fetch water." Jan persisted. He went to Lek. "Sir, I have an idea." He laid it out. A heavy dart, shot from his sling. The head of the dart would be a small packet. "Potassium chlorate and sugar," Jan whispered, naming the ingredients for a common improvised incendiary. "But it needs a trigger." He held up the glass vial of acid. "If I can put this at the very tip, when the dart hits, the glass breaks. The acid mixes. It makes fire. A hot fire." Lek looked at him. It was absurd, but Kret, overhearing, was furious. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You'll waste my chemicals. You'll set yourself on fire. You'll get us all killed." The other men laughed, but Lek didn't. He saw the logic. "Show me," Lech said. Jan tried to build one. The first prototype was a failure. A cloth bag of powder taped to a bolt. It was unstable, tumbling in the air. He needed weight, aerodynamics, and a reliable trigger. He would have to design it from scratch. Lech made the decision. He would shield the boy. He officially assigned Jan to rations duty, a cover that allowed him to scavenge materials. To Kret, he claimed he was developing a new long-range fuse for their mines, and he requisitioned a small amount of potassium chlorate, sugar, and, most importantly, a few vials of concentrated sulfuric acid. Kret protested, but Lech was the commander. The Hornet project was now secret, protected by Lech alone. They found a hidden ravine, a kilometer from the main camp, to serve as their test range. Jan set to work. He was no longer a runner. He was his father's son, a clockmaker building a weapon. He needed a projectile that was heavy enough to be stable in flight, yet light enough for his sling to propel. He melted lead fishing weights and stolen plumbing seals over a small shielded fire. He cast them in a simple clay mold, creating an aerodynamic 3-inch long dart, much like a modern lawn dart. He hollowed out the head. This payload bay he meticulously packed with the finely ground chlorate and sugar mixture. The fins were the next problem. He tried wood and paper. Both were too fragile or got wet. He settled on small stiff fins cut from a captured German Zeltbahn shelter quarter, which was waterproof. The final piece was the trigger. This was the genius of the design. He couldn't just tape the glass vial of acid to the front. It might break on launch or be too fragile. Instead, he created a small percussion cap. He fixed the tiny glass bead of acid inside the nose cone, right in front of the incendiary mixture, but held it in place with a thin membrane of wax. The force of impact on the dart's lead tip would inertia slam the glass bead forward, shattering it into the chlorate. It was a chemical percussion fuse. He built 3 prototypes. Lech watched, his skepticism warring with a growing sense of awe. The boy was meticulous. He was an engineer. They set up their target, a stack of damp logs over which they draped a burlap sack soaked in precious foul-smelling gasoline. They paced off 40 meters. The air in the ravine was still. The only sound was a distant woodpecker. Lek held his breath. This is madness, he thought. I've staked my career, my men's lives, on a child's toy. Jan simply checked the wind, his face a mask of concentration. Jan loaded the first prototype. The dart felt heavy and balanced in the leather pouch. He drew the reinforced bands, aimed, and released. The thwack of the sling echoed in the ravine. The dart flew and tumbled. The fins were too small. It spun end over end, hitting the ground 20 meters short, failing to detonate. A dull thud. Kret, who had followed them suspiciously, sneered from the ridge. "A fine weapon, Lieutenant. Maybe you can kill a rabbit if it's sleeping." Lek felt his heart sink. It was a failure. "It was a good thought, Maui," Lek said, his voice heavy with disappointment. But John wasn't listening. He was analyzing. He retrieved the dart. "The center of gravity is wrong. Too much weight in the head, not enough drag." He pulled out the second dart. He hadn't just built 3. He had built 3 variations. This one had slightly larger fins, set further back. He walked 10 meters closer, reducing the range to 30. He wouldn't fail again. He loaded, drew, and fired. The thwack was sharper. The dart hissed through the air, perfectly stable. It struck the gasoline-soaked sack dead center. For one agonizing second, nothing. Then a whoosh. A brilliant white-hot chemical flame, far more intense than a simple match, erupted from the point of impact. The chlorate mixture burned at over 1,500 degrees Celsius, instantly vaporizing the gasoline. The burlap sack didn't just burn, it vanished. The damp logs underneath were smoking, the surface wood already charred black. Kret's jaw dropped. Lek stared, speechless. The fire was terrifyingly effective. It was self-oxidizing. It wouldn't be easy to put out. Jan, his voice perfectly level, retrieved his first dart. "I need to adjust the fin size and add more weight to the tail. But it works." He looked at Lek. "The fuel tank cap on an Opel Blitz. It's rubber and cork. This will burn through it before they can even stop the truck. If stories of ingenuity like this fascinate you, stay with us. The next chapter of this quiet war might just change how you see the fight." The success in the ravine was one thing. Convincing the Home Army's rigid command structure was another. Lech requested an immediate meeting with Major Moat, Hammer, the district commander, who was on a rare inspection tour. The meeting was held in the camp's main dugout, a smoky, claustrophobic space that smelled of wet wool and unwashed bodies. Moat was a pre-war cavalry officer, a man who believed in discipline, firepower, and traditional tactics. He sat on an ammo crate, his face a mask of impatience. Kret, the sapper, was also present, his arms crossed. Lek laid out the case. He described the failure of the mines, the high cost of ambushes, and the strategic need for a new weapon. Then he placed Jan's Hornet dart on the table. Moat picked it up, examining it with disdain. "Lieutenant," Moat said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you called me here to show me a dart? You are suggesting we arm our men with slingshots?" Kret seized his moment. "Sir, with respect, it's a diversion. It's a child's fantasy. I am responsible for the unit's explosives. This invention uses my most valuable chemical initiators. It's an unacceptable waste of resources. It's unstable. The boy will set himself or our ammunition stores on fire." The other officers in the dugout murmured in agreement. It sounded insane. Lek felt the moment slipping away. He looked at Jan, who was standing silently in the corner. "Jan," Lech commanded, "explain." The boy stepped forward, his terror palpable but his voice steady. He wasn't a soldier defending a tactic. He was an engineer defending a design. "Major," Jan began, his voice clear. "You are thinking of attacking the truck's armor. I am attacking its vulnerabilities. The Opel Blitz 3, 6-ton truck. Its fuel tank is on the right side, mounted externally just below the cab. The cap is a simple cork and rubber seal." He pointed at the dart. "This is not an explosive. It is an incendiary initiator. The acid breaks the glass on impact. It ignites the chlorate. This burns hot enough to melt the rubber seal and ignite the fuel fumes. The truck's own fuel is the weapon." He held up a second dart. "This one is for the canvas. The canvas covers on German trucks are treated with wax and linseed oil to be waterproof. They are highly flammable. If I hit the canvas, the truck's cargo, ammunition, rations, uniforms, becomes the fuel. It is silent. I can carry 50 of these. Kret can carry 2 mines. I can fire 10 of these in a minute. The attack is over before the escort even knows where it's coming from." There was a dead silence. Moat stared at the boy, then at Lech. He was trapped between doctrine and a new, terrifying logic. "This is highly irregular," Moat said. Lech saw his opening and took a massive gamble. "Sir, give us one convoy. The next one on the Garwolen route. Jan and I, Kret, can provide sniper cover. If we fail, you can have me court-martialed for wasting vital resources. But if we succeed, you give Jan his own detachment." Moat looked at Jan's hands, stained with lead and chemicals. He saw the unblinking confidence in the boy's eyes. "One convoy. Do not fail, Lieutenant." The forest was swallowed by the deep, moonless dark of August 11th, 1943. The air was heavy, humid, and buzzing with insects. Lech and Jan were in position, 30 meters from the Garwolen road. Jan was not on the ground. He was perched 15 feet up in the spreading branches of an old oak, a position that gave him a clear, plunging angle of attack. He had a pouch with 6 Hornet darts. Lech was 50 meters behind him, acting as lookout and rear guard. A kilometer down the road, Moat, Kret, and the rest of the Yodwa platoon waited, ready to create a diversion or cover the retreat. They were the failsafe. Jan was the primary weapon. They heard the convoy before they saw it. The distant grinding rumble of engines. Headlights cut through the trees. Lech's heart hammered against his ribs. It was a standard supply convoy. A Kubelwagen scout car in front, followed by 4 Opel Blitz trucks and another Kubelwagen at the rear. Lech whispered into the stillness, "Let the first car pass, hit the second truck, then the lead. Stop them. Create chaos." The Kubelwagen roared past, its occupants unaware. The first Opel Blitz truck lumbered into view. Jan drew his sling. The truck was moving at 30 kilometers per hour. He had to lead it. He aimed for the canvas cover. He released. The thwack of the sling was absorbed by the engine noise. The dart arced, a black flicker against the dark sky, and struck the canvas of the second truck. A perfect hit. A white-hot bloom of fire. The driver, seeing flames in his side mirror, slammed on his brakes. Jan was already reloading. The lead truck, seeing the truck behind it stop, also began to slow. Jan fired again. The second dart. He aimed for the fuel tank of the lead truck, a metallic tink, as it struck the steel tank just above the cap. The chemical fire wasn't strong enough to burn through the steel, but it burned the rubber fuel line running from the tank to the engine. The effect was instantaneous. Gasoline sprayed onto the hot engine block and the chemical fire. The entire cab of the lead truck erupted in a fireball. The third truck, blocked by the second, slammed into it. Jan fired his third dart, hitting the canvas of the third truck. In less than 30 seconds, the convoy was a flaming wreck. The lead truck was a pyre. The second and third were burning, their canvas covers collapsing, igniting their cargo. Drivers were bailing out. The German escorts in the rear Kubelwagen screeched to a halt and opened fire with their MG-34, tracers ripping harmlessly into the dense forest, meters away from Jan's hidden position. The ambush was over. Lech grabbed Jan's arm. "Now, we go." They vanished into the undergrowth, the sounds of shouting, secondary explosions, and uncontrolled machine gun fire fading behind them. From his observation post, Major Mouat watched through his binoculars, his knuckles white. He saw the fire, the chaos, the effectiveness. 3 trucks, the backbone of the convoy, were catastrophically destroyed. The road was blocked. The mission was a total success, achieved without a single shot fired by his men, and with 0 casualties. He lowered the binoculars, a slow, stunned understanding dawning on his face. He looked at Kret, who was staring at the inferno. Mouat simply nodded. The Shersen project was no longer an idea. It was now a critical component of their war. The success on the Garwolan Road was a turning point. Major Mouat, a convert, immediately authorized the creation of Shersen teams. These were not traditional combat units. They were 3-man hunter-killer cells, typically composed of 2 sling operators and 1 armed lookout. John, now given the code name Zagarmeesters, the watchmaker, was tasked with training the first cadre of operators. He taught them his physics, how to read wind, how to lead a moving target, how to build and maintain the darts. The weapon's simplicity was its genius. The components, lead, rubber, sugar, chlorate, and acid, were all scavengeable. Chlorate could be extracted from matches, acid from vehicle batteries. The impact was soon felt. German Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, reports from late 1943 for the General Gouvernement began to note an alarming and inexplicable spike in soft-skinned vehicle losses due to spontaneous fire. German security patrols, finding only the burned-out husks of trucks, were baffled. They blamed faulty wiring, poor maintenance, or new partisan explosives. They never suspected the real delivery system. The silence of the attack was its greatest defense. By the time the fire was spotted, the Shersen team was already a kilometer away. The Home Army's own internal reports were more precise. A dispatch from the Radom Kielce District Command in early 1944 praised the watchmaker's method, crediting it with the confirmed destruction of over 80 transport vehicles in that sector alone. Across occupied Poland, the idea spread. It was a mosquito bite campaign, but the mosquito carried a deadly fever. For an industrial war machine, logistics are lifeblood. Jan's invention was a persistent, silent, and highly efficient anticoagulant. It didn't win the war, but it bled the German Ninth Army's supply lines at a crucial time, forcing them to divert combat troops to guard the roads, further stretching their resources. Jan Kowalski's name was never written in a medal citation. He remained anonymous, a ghost in the forest. When the AK's High Command launched the tragic 1944 Warsaw Uprising, Jan, now 16, joined his partisan brothers. He fought in the Śródmieście Południe, city center south sector. He was last seen defending a barricade on Krucha Street, armed not with his slingshot, but with a captured rifle. He, like 150,000 other Poles, was consumed by the city's systematic destruction. His body was never found. He was forgotten. His only legacy the quiet, whistling echo of his invention and the burned-out trucks that lined the forest roads. The principle of Jan's Hornet is the very definition of asymmetric warfare. It is a timeless military doctrine. Don't attack an enemy's strength. Attack their most critical, undefended vulnerability. This philosophy, born in the desperate forests of Poland, echoes today. It is the same logic that drives a modern cyber warfare expert who, instead of attacking a fortified server, targets a single unsecured laptop to bring down a network. It is the same principle used by disaster response engineers who, with limited resources, must find the one simple low-tech fix that restores a system. Not the most powerful solution, but the most elegant. Jan's story is a profound lesson in the nature of innovation. War is so often remembered as a clash of industrial titans, of B-17s versus Messerschmitts, of T-34s versus Tigers. But this is an incomplete history. It is also a secret history of quiet, desperate ingenuity. It is the story of the individual mind, armed with scarcity and a deep understanding of a problem, creating a solution that force and industry cannot. John the watchmaker Kowalski, an orphan with a clockmaker's mind, saw what the professional soldiers missed. He saw the flaw in the mechanism. He understood that to stop a machine, you don't always need an explosion. Sometimes all you need is a spark, delivered to the perfect place. The great forests of Poland, the Puszcza, still stand. The roads are paved now. Trucks carrying consumer goods travel the same routes where Opel Blitzes once carried ammunition. The quiet has returned. But the trees that once sheltered a 15-year-old boy and his crazy idea remain. They are silent witnesses to the fact that the smallest, most overlooked hand, when armed with clarity and defiance, can shift the balance of power, and that true courage is not always the roar of a cannon, but sometimes the silent thwack of a single, well-aimed shot. Every great idea begins as an act of defiance against impossibility. What impossible ideas do you think could change our world today?